Hello from Glasgow and welcome to Untold, telling the stories you maybe don't know. I've seen this city undergo enormous change even during my brief 40-year stay. Everything changes, obviously. Change is part of life. Change is always good. Or is it? This week, I'm going to be telling the untold story behind Glasgow's 2014 hosting of the Commonwealth Games in the East End of the city, specifically in Kilmarnock. Do you remember the media hoo-ha at the time? Putting in the bid, getting down to the last two, and then the news Glasgow had won? It was everywhere and seemed like a really feel-good story because, and let's not kid ourselves here, large sporting events like this these days are less about the athletes taking part and more about the much needed disposable income the tourists bring with them. In other words, it's all about the money. And that's fine. I'm all for redistributing the wealth. A rising tide raises all the boats. So if we can get our visitors from abroad to buy a fish supper and a can of juice on their way back from a day spent watching folk trying to run faster than each other in Kilmarnock, that can only be a good thing. But that didn't happen. So why didn't it happen? And what went wrong? This is Untold, Glasgow's 2014 hosting of the Commonwealth Games. A little background here, because not everyone watching this is going to be either from Glasgow or familiar with the layout of this illustrious city. Like all large conurbations the world over, Glasgow has its posh bits and its not so posh bits. Back in the 20th century, and broad brushstrokes here, Glasgow's best place to live league table went something like this. At the top, the West End. In second place, the South Side. Third, we have North Glasgow. And at the very bottom of the league comes the East End. Historically, the first two of these were where the factory owners and industrialists lived in their big houses. And the last two were where the factories, coal mines and ironworks were located, along with the homes of their employees. Back in the day, Glasgow's East End, Kilmarnock, Bridgeton, Parkhead, Tollcross, Shettleston and Camlachie Barrowfield put this city on the map and made Glasgow the powerhouse of heavy industry she was from the early 19th century up till Mr. Beardmore's world-famous forge at Parkhead closed in 1976. Along with the factories, the forges, the ironworks and the coal mines, this part of my city also featured incredibly dense housing, traditionally in the form of the signature red or blonde sandstone Glasgow tenement. Originally built to house the huge influx of urban manual workers to the city during the Industrial Revolution. And they were built to last. This is Untold, Glasgow's 2014 hosting of the Commonwealth Games. The tenement is a Glasgow-wide phenomenon. In the East End specifically, there are usually 4 floors of homes, 2 or 3 flats per landing, with 2, 3 or 4 rooms per flat, depending on the design, leading to, typically, 12 families, each of up to 9 people, in one building, sharing a communal close area, entrance passage and stone stairs, and, up until as late as the 1970s, the similarly signature outside toilet, situated either on a landing or outside in the shared communal back court. That's as many as 108 people literally living on top of each other, with possibly only one toilet between them. Are you horrified? Many of our city planners and politicians were. And by the time we'd reached the 1980s, although these once beautiful sandstone tenements were still standing, their exteriors had been blackened by a century of emissions from coal-fired industries. This is Untold, Glasgow's 2014 hosting of the Commonwealth Games. Remember the 1980s, remember? Out with the old, in with the new. Everything had to be bright and shiny. So someone, somewhere, in the corridors of local power, took a look at these rows and rows of tenements and made a value judgment. Ugly, slummy, get rid of them. As for the people currently occupying these houses, well, seen through the prism of your local politician, these people were also voters. Glasgow City Council decided the inhabitants of Kilmarnock couldn't possibly like living in such squalid conditions. Their words, not mine. And would jump at the chance to be rehomed in showpiece new houses with indoor toilets and private entrances on the many estates now fringing the sprawling metropolis. And some did. In dribs and drabs, people began to move out of Kilmarnock. But a fair number stayed. Local opposition to the decision to demolish what were, after all, perfectly good houses and people's homes was strong, because there were alternatives. A decade earlier, in the 1970s, Glasgow City Council had tried something similar up the road in Denniston, where the buildings had also been blackened by nearly 100 years of coal fires and factory emissions. The folk who lived in these tenements didn't want to move, didn't see why they should move, and formed the Reedvale Housing Association to thwart the council, who were astounded when a wee bit of sandblast cleaning revealed street after street of stunning blonde stone homes. This is Untold, Glasgow 2014 hosting of the Commonwealth Games. And we're on a wee detour here to fill in some background. In Kilmarnock, the council, to their shame, ignored local opposition. The demolition of the tenements would go ahead and rebuilding was promised. But both were slow, so slow. Why? We had the Garden Festival coming up in 1988. All eyes would be on Glasgow. She had to look her best. And that takes money. A remnant of our once great shipbuilding heritage, the derelict Prince's Dock on the banks of the River Clyde in Govan, another area which, like Kilmarnock, had lost its industry and was in serious need of help, was repurposed as the festival site, with the main attraction, the Coca-Cola roller coaster. This is Untold, Glasgow's 2014 hosting of the Commonwealth Games. Meanwhile, on the banks of the same river, further upstream, Kilmarnock's hanging in there. Its population is half of what it was, its fine selection of independent shops still catering to local people, although in what would these days be described as difficult trading conditions. The sporadic and wanton demolition of row upon row of perfectly good sandstone tenements led to acre upon acre of waste ground. Other buildings, now unoccupied and unmaintained, began to deteriorate all on their own. One earlier rebuilding project from the 1960s, the Millerfield High Flats and Maisonettes, still towered defiantly over the area, with amazing views over the river, inside toilets and a lift, which worked most of the time, and where generations of Kilmarnock folk were happily raising their families. This is Untold, Glasgow's 2014 hosting of the Commonwealth Games. Yes, 4.3 million people came to the refurbished Prince's Dock over the summer of 1988, and from all reports spent a bit of money in the city. and the Garden Festival was deemed a great success, sparking a cultural and economic revival that's still being felt in the city to this day. Glasgow Life's words, not mine. Nor Govin's, probably. Yes, the slummy tenements there have been replaced by modern new housing, but the place is dominated by roads and a bit of a ghost area compared to its shipbuilding heyday. But we got some good press, a bit more money in the coffers, which we're going to need because Glasgow is going to be City of Culture in 1990. And this is seen by the great and the good as a major opportunity for us to rebrand ourselves as the type of thrusting, modern, creatively significant metropolis that will attract tourists with their much needed disposable income. So yeah, bring on this culture-led economic miracle that's going to turn the tide and raise all the boats. And bring it on they did. Do you remember? It's all Glasgow going on. Remember Mr. Happy? We had concerts, plays about shipbuilding, Pavarotti came, Charles Rennie Mackintosh and his merchandise were everywhere. That money pit, the Borough Collection, got a new purpose-built, taxpayer-funded home, and Glasgow's international profile was raised. We got good press, we attracted outside investment. There was a certain intangible, don't you love those intangibles, feel-good factor. Or at least according to all the media coverage there was. This is Untold, Glasgow's 2014 hosting of the Commonwealth Games. The rebranding project forged ahead, with New Glasgow on track. Meanwhile, what about Dalmarnock? Oh, it's still there through all this, deteriorating nicely, where active demolition isn't taking place. A smaller population now, fewer independent shops, thanks to the Forge shopping centre up the road in Parkhead, built on the site of Mr. Beardmore's world-famous works, where, back in the day, 40,000 people had good, secure, well-paid jobs, plus acre upon acre of empty land on which nothing had been built. There's still a couple of major local employers, notably bars, your other national drink in nearby Bridgeton, and a biscuit factory in Tall Cross, both of which subsequently move out to areas where wages and business rates are lower. Local folk in Dalmarnock are still living their lives. With Mrs. Thatcher's encouragement, many now own their own homes, having purchased their tenement flats. But also, and flying in the face of Thatcher's much quoted "there is no such thing as society," there's a thriving community centre where, it must be said, Pavarotti did not appear, but which runs computer classes, keep fit, bingo, with blossoming community gardens, several excellent play parks, and a useful hall which can be hired for birthday parties and other celebrations. As run down and deprived of investment as it was, Dalmarnock hung in there and continued to hang in there through the 1990s and into the new millennium. This is Untold, Glasgow's 2014 hosting of the Commonwealth Games. Despite all this tourist and outside investment money, which the Garden Festival and City of Culture was supposed to bring, the council remained cash-strapped. Several banking crises came and went. Housing stock in many of the peripheral estates, to which folk had moved from the inner city's so-called slums, remember, turned out to be damp and not fit for purpose. They were demolished and new housing hurriedly built. Norman Foster's massive high-rises in the Gorbals ended up full of mould. Down they came, and the new Gorbals housing was planned. And if you followed all this in local and national media, you'd get the impression all was well. And the rebranding of New Glasgow was forging ahead to the benefit of all its citizens because there was rebuilding and there were new houses. But it was all done on a firefighting basis. We're a big city with a bigger population that's just getting bigger and bigger. We've lost all our traditional industries, and the bulk of that outside investment comes in the form of banking, retail and hospitality, the service industries. Which means call centres, bars and shops. New jobs? Yes. Better jobs? What do you think? What did also happen is the city started hosting stuff. Conferences, outdoor gigs, international football championships, bagpipe competitions. There's hard cash in this for a cash-strapped city council through the leasing of land to promoters and organisers, and there's money for city centre hotel, restaurant and bar owners. So yeah, it looks like Glasgow's thriving. We have a saying up here, fur coat, nae knickers. This tidy wee phrase neatly sums up an attitude which began to make its presence increasingly felt. Appearance is what matters. Surface is all. Show the good bits. Focus on the success stories. Set out your stall as attractively as possible and hope no one notices you're selling the Emperor's new clothes. Because less than a mile from where the bagpipe playing competitions are held in Glasgow Green, Kilmarnock's still there. Yes, despite a bit of rebuilding, decades of demolition, lack of investment, and even fewer job opportunities have taken their toll. But Kilmarnock folk are made of strong stuff, and more importantly, they have faith. They trust their city council. They trust their political representatives. Over the years, promises have been made. Things will get better. Help is coming. And it looks like this time it's actually going to happen. Because building on the rebranding success of the Garden Festival and the City of Culture, in 2005, Glasgow registers a bid to host the 2014 Commonwealth Games. And where are the Games going to take place? Kilmarnock. This is Untold, Glasgow's 2014 hosting of the Commonwealth Games. Join me next time for part 2 and find out what happens next.